Man is as old as his arteries.
Now, I want to has to come back to the mitochondria piece, but I
Mhm.
want to know if there are any, because you mentioned sleep, and obviously, a lot of large individuals, big bodybuilders, big powerlifters, they have sleep apnea, so they're probably getting sort of messed up sleep. Some of these individuals some of them do take performance enhancing drugs, they walk around with massive amounts of muscle that maybe their heart isn't able to handle. So it makes me wonder, what are some ways and what are some practices that these athletes can take to make sure that as they're going through their athletic careers, whatever it is that they're going down, that they can make sure that they're just staying as safe as possible and they have as least risk as possible in terms of having heart issues or a heart attack, etc. Because isn't like more so men that end up dying of heart attacks too than women, like a much higher percentage of men?
Not necessarily. It's that the
No?
women are
Okay.
kind of phase shifted 10 years later when they start developing more disease, when estrogen levels drop in
Mm.
menopause. Heart disease is still the number one thing that takes out both men and women. More women die of heart disease than breast cancer. So breast
Mm.
cancer is very serious, but you still need to be screened for your cardiovascular risk.
Mm.
So I'll kind of take the first one, like it's test, don't guess. Again, if half the heart attacks happen in people that don't have symptoms, you need to go looking before they have their symptoms. Doing a classic stress test in somebody who's not having symptoms, it's very unlikely that they would fail a stress test. By the time you fail a stress test, you generally have a 70% blockage in one of your heart arteries. And so somebody who's very fit is probably going to very easily pass that stress test, but they still could have arteries of an 80-year-old man inside and they wouldn't know that, because most of the heart attacks that actually happen are in smaller blockages that don't cause symptoms. It's kind of like having a pimple on your artery. And if that pimple pops, now the blood clots in that area, and now you have 100% blockage, and that's what causes the heart attack. So the non-invasive test that you can look at, one, if you have access to something called an endopad, it looks at the endothelial function. So it can tell your body how much nitric oxide can you make right now. If you're making good nitric oxide, less likely stuff sticking to your arteries to begin with, and you have healthy arteries. But if you don't have healthy endothelium, well, then the first thing that happens is that the walls of the artery start thickening. They start getting more inflamed. Stuff that's floating through the bloodstream sticks to the artery, gets below the wall of the artery, and the immune system turns on, thinks, hey, man, there's an infection going on, and sends out, the warriors to go fight it. And then that tissue starts swelling. So you can do an ultrasound of your neck and measure that thickness. If there's thickness in the walls of the arteries in your neck, then you're set up to start developing plaque in the arteries. And so that test will actually give you a vascular age. So if you're biologically 45, but they tell you your arteries are 65, you're as old as your arteries are. There was a physician in the 1600s, his name's Thomas Syntham, that was his saying, man is as old as his arteries. So that test is called the carotid intimal medial thickness test, or CIMT. Painless ultrasound test, takes 5-10 minutes. But then, we've kind of go down the pathways of, okay, your arteries are inflamed. What's the next step? If you don't shut off what's causing the damage, then that's when you start getting those calcifications and fibrotic tissue buildup in the arteries. And you can go get a test. Most places, do it for about $100, $200, called a CT coronary calcium scan, or calcium scan, low dose radiation CT scan that looks at your heart arteries and looks at, do you have any calcium in the walls of the artery? Obviously, calcium is supposed to be in your bones and teeth. It's not supposed to be in your arteries. So if you have calcium in your arteries, that indicates that there's plaque present. And it's not so much concerning that you got hard calcified plaque. That stuff rarely causes heart attacks. It can cause symptoms if you have a big rock in the artery and it's restricting blood flow. But that there's calcified plaque in the arteries. There's also the soft plaque. And it's more concerning about that soft plaque because sometimes that's much more vulnerable to rupturing. Again, it's like a pimple. If that pimple pops, blood clots there, boom, that's what the heart attack is. So the real goal is first find the person, do they have plaque in their arteries? If they have plaque, then do the blood work. Do they have LPLA? Do they have ApoE genes that are ApoE4? Do they have high ApoE particles? There's all sorts of advanced cardiovascular markers that you can check. And then you usually can pinpoint, okay, this is what's likely putting the plaque in your arteries. Let's pull this lever, shut it down. And if you give enough time, the body has an amazing ability to start healing itself. And you can see that plaque start regressing.
Yeah, I know you're enjoying this episode, but I have a question for you. Are you still dieting off of broccoli, chicken, and rice, and maybe tilapia if you want to spice things up? Well, it's 2021. We're past that. That's why we've partnered with Piedmontese Beef. Now, Piedmontese is an amazing company that has cuts of beef that are really high fat or cuts of beef that are low fat. So if you are dieting on a low fat diet, you don't need to resort to the weak bird of chicken. You can instead eat some beef, eat some steak, and still end up getting the results you're looking for. So Andrew, can you tell the people how to get it?
Yes, you guys got to head over to Piedmontese.com. That's Piedmontese.com. At checkout, enter promo code Power Project for 25% off your entire order. And if your order is $150 or more, you get free 2-day shipping. Links to them down in the description, as well as the podcast show notes. Let's get back to the podcast.
You're mentioning a lot of tests, and I really do want to encourage people to look into getting a doctor. I think a lot of times people don't even know who their primary care doctor is, and they may have never even investigated just getting some lab work done. You don't even need to necessarily go to a doctor to get lab work done. You know, a little bit later on the show, we'll let people know how they can benefit from Merrick Health and get their blood work done and have a doctor kind of oversee everything. So I definitely want to encourage that. But what are some things where someone can kind of just look in the mirror or maybe use measuring tape to measure their waist? Is there any sort of correlate between like our waistline, our body weight, BMI, any of these things with whether we should really have major concern, or like if you have a 28-inch waist, are you like, hey, I really don't think I have a problem? But as you mentioned, heart attack is so dangerous because there doesn't appear to be any symptoms for a lot of folks.
Correct. And, there are some people that, you can look at and say they're probably going to be higher risk of having cardiovascular disease. So, if they have a lot of adiposity or fat tissue over their abdomen area, that stuff tends to be very, highly inflammatory. But even that kind of subcutaneous fat isn't as bad as the fat that's outlining your organs. So if you're putting fat on the outside of your liver or outside of your heart, that's much more inflammatory to the system. And that's stuff you can't see unless you do, certain type of imaging test, or you do blood work and shows that they have high inflammatory markers. Well, then you got to go figure out what's causing that inflammation. One interesting sign that's not specific for it, but if you notice it, is that, if you look at somebody's earlobes and they have a big crease going through it, that's called the Frank sign. It means there's some issue with the collagen production in that region. Collagen's, all throughout your body and your tendons, and kind of what connects everything together. But if you have poor collagen in your earlobes, sometimes that associates with having poor collagen in your cardiovascular system.
You don't have it, bro.
You start looking at each other's ears.
So I was like,
are there some other telltale signs that are kind of similar to that, perhaps?
Well, they would be a little bit more rare. So some people have some familial hyperlipidemia, so they got excessively high lipid particles. So basically the cholesterol starts kind of depositing into their, in their eyes. So their cornea will be yellow. They'll have, little yellow dots over their tendons. That's extremely rare. I've only seen a few cases of that. But again, most of the time, just looking at somebody from the outside, you can't truly always know what the cardiovascular system's doing. And, you guys know that, Bob Harper was very fit on the outside. He ends up having an MI in the gym and got resuscitated by a medical student. He ended up getting a stent in his left anterior descending artery, and later found out he had lipoprotein(a). Again, he didn't know that. Not saying I could have prevented him from having a heart attack, but if he had a calcium score test and some other things, he probably had some soft plaques building up that you might have said, hey, you're at higher risk. I can't absolutely prevent this, but you need to know that you're at risk and mitigate some of those risk factors.
Can these things be reversed with like training? Like, can you go out for like a brisk run or a good walk and have your heart rate be, just a little bit elevated for a bit, and maybe you can somehow increase the strength of your heart? And are any of these things amplifiers to help you live longer, perhaps?
Oh, for sure. Exercise is, the best drug that we have. It's the best anti-aging thing that humans have ever figured out. Now, there's always a correct dose of the exercise, and so I know that sometimes the challenge with the pro athletes and such is that they overdo it. And said earlier about sleep, we'll circle back around to that. But the story is that exercise is a stressor to the system. You stress the system, you recover the system. But during exercise, you release a lot of nitric oxide. That nitric oxide is very healthy to the endothelium. Stuff doesn't stick to your arteries. During exercise, you create heat in your body. That heat is a form of energy that the cells can ultimately use in these water networks in the mitochondria. And then exercise, helps with stress reduction. So if you have less stress, less issues with blood pressure. So there's so many beneficial things of exercise. So, you start with the person where they're at. So if there's somebody's a complete couch potato, maybe they're just going to go out there and start walking initially. And then, you work them up to doing some more, vigorous type of cardiovascular exercise. But, you guys are the experts in, strength training such. So you teach them where they're at and, get them stronger.
Hey, little mama, let me whisper in your ear. Like, comment, subscribe to the channel because we continue to bring you peak content on this channel. Obviously, you guys are here. You guys have watched the whole video. So like, comment, subscribe. All right. See you later.